So just a quick comment. Elamin wrote he's trying to log in, so maybe he will join us in a few seconds as well, just as a side note.
Okay. Right. Okay, then let me kick off and just share some of the the different system configurations that we typically encounter in solar systems. Obviously, there are many variations on this, but I think there are a couple that are good to have close at hand. And so let me take you through those solar PV systems. So what we're basically going to look at is the PV on-grid system configuration, which is the pure PV on-grid PREGI, as you will see it in South Africa, even though I think you are very involved in the one that includes storage. And
That's right.
So we'll have PV on-grid with storage as well as a key configuration, which is very established in the residential sector, on the commercial and industrial sector, and it plays different roles in the two. But I think this being fairly basic, we'll just touch on the key functions, and then we have the on-grid, the off-grid system been around for decades and has always had a role to play. So here just the symbols that we're using, basically the PV module, an inverter, and we're not really being specific on whether it is a battery or a PV inverter. Obviously here, if you know your stuff, you will know that this has to be a battery inverter. Together with the battery, the whole thing is referred to as a battery energy storage solution, and typically of a control configuration that kind of manages the energy and manages export and import, etc., to try and really optimize the system. Then we've got wind. I mean, we're not talking a lot about it. Diesel generator for the bigger installations, bigger homes, electricity meter, and then finally we've got consumers, large consumers, and the grid. So we are draft a couple of system configurations, but just in terms of the grid, and I think it's important because one also needs to understand when are you on grid, when are you off grid, and of different constellations, because you also, if you're in a town that is powered by a diesel generator, then but it's not connected to the national grid, but you're buying power from that town, then you're actually still on grid, because there is somebody who owns the generation assets, and you are interacting with that through your on-grid PV system, and certainly know that you're feeding power in so that they can maintain their side of the story, which is obviously stability and quality. So I would say the definition of a grid is an interconnected electrical system and includes all the demand. So if we're thinking again, South Africa, it would be the coal-fired power stations, the nuclear plants, the hydros, some of the large-scale IPPs, and then all of the consumers network. And within the consumers network, we typically now find embedded generation in the form of a residential rooftop and a commercial rooftop system. So that's how, and I mean, it is that transition of grid 2.0, which is now kind of the smart grid where power can flow in all directions, and where clever decisions are made to minimize or to optimize the grid, Yeah, okay, so then we've got our solar PV systems that can configured into a number of ways in order to integrate into the existing infrastructure. Okay, so then, so our first one, the PV on-grid configuration, is then essentially, as it's shown here on the slide, you've got your two key components being your solar and your solar inverter that feed power into the grid. You can see that's the border between the utility, the grid supplier, whoever is selling you energy, and then the consumer. So it would be on the other side of the meter, and own network. And you then have your home, your load, your office, whatever it is, all sitting on that side. And so this is what we typically call an embedded generation, because we've got a consumer here, in a network, but there is embedded generation. It's not generation that is purely supplying power to the grid like an independent power producer does by definition. And then here is the ability to import electricity. We need to do it at night all the time. We are completely dependent on the grid at night. During the day, we generate some of our own power over here and take the difference. If we generate too much, we send that power out to the grid if the regulator allows us to do that. And I think South Africa, with all the municipalities, you have different rules. But I think most of the municipalities have come on board and have allowed grid connection. Some say don't send us any power. Some say send us power, but we're not going to give you any credit. And then the final one, I think, is saying it's fine. We'll give you a credit for your electric tariff as you're buying the power. And then I think the very last one is when you got the mechanical meter with a disc that essentially says, well, if you're paying a rand per kilowatt hour, you are going to get a credit of 1 kilowatt hour, rand per kilowatt hour as well. But I think what is very typical, certainly I've never come across anything that doesn't do that, is that the money always flows from the load, from the consumer to the grid. And in embedded generation, I've never seen that the utility would pay the load. So they might say at the most extreme, you can offset all your electricity over a year, but that's it. You were never going to give you money, really change the whole revenue system, and they're just not geared for it, to kind of send money back. So they'll give you a credit, and you might be able to get this number here down to zero. Yeah. Okay, what I would say is our most common configuration worldwide. And that is also my sense that this is going to be the one that will ensure the large uptake over the next 30 years, as I've shared with you in our first presentation. So then just to give you an idea, so that's what it would look like. Solar on the roof, solar inverter, here the grid, and then here you've got your home that can absorb the power, but it can also send it back up to the grid or import some power. So I think on-grid system, I'm just wondering whether that title, Keep Simple, should really be there. I think not. The on-grid PV system is really, solar PV is converted to AC, and it is the PV system, and I think that is important to understand, doesn't do anything on its own. It complements the grid. So if the system fails, everything will still continue, other than that one actually takes in more electricity from the grid. But a system like that supplies the loads, and the difference, the shortfall, is supplied by the grid. And that's really the beauty of the system. It is not responsible for keeping the lights on. As long as one has a grid supply, one can offset one's own electricity. But if that system fails, it's not loud, and that obviously is the beauty of such a system. And then I think what is also interesting is that the PV power is used first, so it'll never not, if there is solar power, and the difference comes from the grid, as I've said. And the reason why that is it's the closest power source to the load. And I must still try and find a good and easy explanation. I think this is what I would have to offer now, because that source of power sits right at the load. It is being used first, and the rest is then made up from the grid electricity. Or three-phase, and you can see the diagram of those different voltage curves, and Johan has touched on that on the basic electricity. And I would say typically PV systems, kilowatt will start being three-phase, so which is also preferred by the local authorities. They don't want to have 10 or 15 kilowatts sitting on one phase. I think there's always a push for a balanced approach here, as it's what one would expect from the transformer situation as well. And the key benefits of an on-grid system: financial savings, because it's cheaper than grid electricity. Rising electricity prices, because if you paid X amount for it, then you paid for it and it'll provide you the service. So it is quite nice in a place of in an environment of rising electricity prices. You're keeping a certain amount of costs constant, you know. And then obviously having some own power generation provides some resiliency to your operation, even if it's a residence, and you know that in the event of a blackout, you will be able to keep the lights on, as they say. You will be able to keep the security system, the electric gate, the intercom, computers, etc., all of that going, and depending on the scale of your whole household on it. Yeah. Okay, then PV on-grid system with storage. Here we are now looking at a system where we are adding basically what we WBS, battery energy storage solution, onto the same bus. This is a specific configuration that is probably more aligned with commercial and industrial storage, because I think there are other options available for residential storage. Would you agree, Preddy?
Yeah, yes, no? That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I think there's often a single inverter and two inverters, just to bring. I think it's called a hybrid inverter, right?
Yeah, for residential, that's true.
For residential, yeah. Yeah, so in a case like that, we have the same demarcation between utility and consumer, and the same energy flows and the same money flows, you know. So again, it can be bidirectional energy flow. Here we're indicating a bigger load, so more industrial, commercial and industrial. And then I think, you know, that such a system, and let me see what I've actually said in the slides, obviously has additional benefits. So again, I'm just giving you the pictures of how that looks like in a residential system here, as opposed to a storage system. Yeah, before I just go ahead, let me follow my slides. You know, in this constellation, we are adding the energy storage system, BESS, as I said, you know, and that and that's the beauty of it. So, and here I'm talking specifically around commercial and industrial. The system is able to inject power when power is expensive, and this refers specifically to the time of use tariffs, you know, and recharge the battery energy system when the power is cheap, you know. And there are more services that can also shift your peak. If you have maximum demand charges, and reduce it, which again to backup power. But because commercial and industrial is typically quite a big consumer, you'd have to add a lot of battery storage, kilowatt hours, plenty, in order to make a meaningful contribution. You know, so typically the backup would be around essential services, the tills, the lighting. I don't think it would be the cooling, because you would always expect that the 2 hours or something like that, the cooling will hold over. That should be a problem. Plus, you will always have a diesel generator with it that can kick in, and if there is if the power cut is too long, So great, obviously, if you have some storage on site, you can feed power in the evening, during the evening peak, which is typically also more expensive. So that talks to the time of use tariff, and then, as I said, you can have the backup function. And I think the overall benefits can be put down to cost savings to reduce utility bill costs, increased improve the savings, because now on your home or on your shopping center, you can put up more solar, and you can stretch it throughout the day because you have storage on site. So you can, you can avoid exporting your electricity and rather put it in the battery to then later dispatch that energy as the sun goes down. So there are a lot of things that one can play with, and then you can potentially have some low on-site backup capacity in the form of battery storage that doesn't require a diesel generator, So you have some options. Commercial and industrial batteries storage interesting in the next decade. In fact, I think it's going to be in the next half a decade that we'll really see some first big systems. The off-grid system, I'm saying here it's been around since the 80s, in my idea, but I remember reading up on the first greenhouses, as they called them back in the days. In the 80s, I wasn't in solar yet. I stepped into the solar field in the 90s, it always had a role to play, because if there was no grid, then your alternative was diesel generator, alternative was solar with battery, but it was still quite pricey, so you had to kind of try and optimize that. But, in the 90s, there were a number of resorts in Namibia, for instance, that we electrified with solar. And it was amazing what they actually managed to do. How many refrigerators they ran with it and kept the lights on and ceiling fans to give certain comfort level to the tourists. It was not really with air conditioning, but put it to the next level just in terms of scale, But it played a role, and it was not subsidized. So it was it was competitive against a grid extension or extensive use of diesel. So any big countries with a low population density could always make use of off-grid solar. So this is the constellation. So if you look at it, it looks actually very similar to your on-grid system with storage, and you've got the same elements here, except that your grid is not available. You can see the red cross there, but you've got solar and an inverter. You've got a battery and an inverter. And here, if you wish, if you don't do it, then you must assume that you occasionally will not be able to serve the load. But you would then have a number of loads, and these things were called hybrid systems, mini grid systems, depending on what really happens in terms of, have you got a lot of different customers? Is it a small town? Is it a single owner on an agricultural facility? So that really is the question. In this case, the solar PV is what we call AC coupled, because you convert the solar into a grid, and that also basically alludes to the fact that there is a DC coupled system, but we are not going into more detail at this course level. We'll take that up in the next course level. So I think here you can see an actual system, fairly small system, but I would say it's residential. You've got your acid left and left. They look like flooded batteries. You can see those two lines at the top of the battery cells where they will show the electrolyte. Then you've got your battery inverter. Sorry, I've got my laser here. So this is the battery, obviously, inverter. Here are your solar inverters at the top that convert your solar and put that also onto the grid on the AC side. So it's exactly what I've shown you there. And then you've got probably a petrol generator, not a diesel generator, because it looks like a 2 or 3 kilowatt unit. So that is really an off-grid system in its smallest form. And I mean, an off-grid system in this, and let's just be, even though I'm actually going to go there just now, but it is designed purely for off-grid. So it never actually sees, a grid is never going to arrive there. If it does for some reason, then one would have to evaluate the system's ability to connect with the grid. But it is not normally given that one would have the necessary hardware and infrastructure to tie such a system that was purposes to a national grid. So we refer to this as a hybrid system, and the hybrid here comes from the fact that we are making use of multiple resources. So we're using solar and we're using diesel. That's where the hybrid comes from. In Africa, there's often talk about a hybrid, a solar, what is it called, a diesel hybrid system or a solar diesel hybrid, but the hybrid is really a term that refers to a number of sources and can include storage or it cannot include storage, So, and in this case, our system included solar PV and diesel generator or petrol generator, Other sources include wind or small hydro or run-of-river hydro. So there are various configuration constellations that one can look at, but it really depends on what is the most prevalent resource. Is it solar? Typically, very well. Wind is very specific to a location, and it's costly at small scale, at kilowatt scale. It really makes sense at megawatt scale. Hundreds or tens to hundreds of megawatts. That's where wind is really good, And then small hydro is really a question of, what are this? Is it a seasonal river, or is it a or dam, or is it a what do you call that? Months throughout the year, So one would have to evaluate that, and then one can essentially build something around. So you could, for instance, say that if it is a seasonal river, you could have 3 months, half a year running with solar and hydro, and the other half you would run with solar and diesel. So you have that flexibility. So in general, you would say a hybrid off-grid provided more or less directly from the sun during the day. And we're focusing here on the PV diesel storage system. The remaining PV power is stored in the battery for nighttime use, And if there is an energy shortfall, either because your goes up or your batteries didn't get full the previous night, then you would be calling on the diesel generator to make up for that shortfall. And again, it also depends on how big it is. Might be that the solar is only possible for the day and you still run with diesel throughout the night. So that's a question of the sizing of the system. Then just briefly other configurations, and I think here one to mention is microgrids, and I think you might be coming across that term more and more. And it is really an amalgamation of the systems that we've spoken about, So it is to operate independently, i.e. off-grid, so it's not connected to a utility grid, containing generation, sources, storage, and some loads. And it is also able to connect to the grid. So it is off-grid and on-grid. And there are certain applications, and I'll run through some of them. So it's quite powerful. It's not very common on the African continent, I would say. It might get there though, and I think in South Africa, for example, it would be mainly driven by the unreliability of the grid. And you might have some housing estates that say, well, let's actually look at putting in a central generator with battery storage and put solar PV across all our roofs, So you're working on a system that would benefit from economies of scale, and then also, pool resource sense, because if some houses are not occupied, their solar would not contribute to the overall system if it was all individual systems, So there are a lot of things that can be done. What I'm seeing a lot of in the US, where they're actually putting in microgrids, which only means it's able to connect to the grid and also work independently. And so it depends on what is might be essential services. Campuses often go for that, and it's maybe around data and internet. You could have hospitals that rely on that. They often have generators anyway, but I think they need. There is a drive to actually add storage to that. Plus, depending on your tariff situation, it might make complete financial sense to have solar and battery storage power into your grid there, So yeah, you can see here, I think that's quite a good rendition of a microgrid system, where you've got the grid, you've got some controller here that will basically say, well, I can cut off here. We've got our solar and wind, for example. We've got a generator. Yes, Johan, I see that. We've got residences, commercial and industrial, and we've got battery storage and EVs. So you can have your whole island going by in particular if the grid is actually overloaded or not available because you've had a storm. That's actually one of the reasons why they're also looking at it. It's de-risking electrical assets that are solar flares and whatever, storms and hurricanes. Yeah, Johan, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, it's quite a nice image. Only thing I would change is add arrow there with the electric vehicles. So it's bidirectional. So that's also coming.
Yes.
Yeah, that's coming exactly. Now, where you can also extract energy from the vehicle to the grid. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree. And it's funny, they actually used a generator. I think maybe the electric vehicle should have been where the generator is. If you see that, there's a bidirectional one for the generator. There's never power flowing to a generator. I think it's probably part of Grid 2.0. The ability to use the electric vehicle as intermediate storage. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Then, the question, why microgrids? So what I mentioned was critical supplies like hospitals, strategic supply, military, because you could say you can always power it with diesel, but strategically you might not always be able, especially if you think military that might be in conflict area, to get the diesel to the site. Having solar on site and battery storage means you can generate some power. The solar resource is at the site. Then you've got institutional microgrids, campuses, data centers. It enhances the resilience and the power reliability with uninterruptible power supply capability. So it's really smart, something that we are seeing in the developed world quite a bit, and I think we'll see more of this in Europe. And I will see this getting into Africa as well, in particular for around stability is an issue, So I think in some countries where grid stability is an issue, I actually see we're on our own. We've lost Lamin and we've lost
Yes.
Christina, usually you are the watcher for this.
Yeah, but I did not want to interrupt you because we are also we're recording. We are recording,
Yeah.
you know.
Yes, we are recording. No, I'm Christina, and secondly, I thought it was really funny when you said it yesterday. So boom, yeah. But I'm actually seeing that the gentleman's avatar has just simply vanished. Here we go. Preggy's back.
Preggy's back. Yeah.
Yay.
Okay,
Axel,
so I think.
One thing, you are very interrupted today. Just as a side note, maybe just finish this session, but maybe you can find out what's going on as well.
I see that my cable. Oh no, my cable is in. My cable has actually taken. I also don't know why that is. You know, my ping rate or whatever it's called is around 200. So is it interrupted?
It was so far, but go ahead. Just because
I can still hear what you say. Yeah. Sorry, Christina, I interrupted you.
No.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, Christina. Nothing obviously comes to mind, but it could go into cables and microphones. I'm wearing a headset that seems to have an integrated microphone. You know, so at some point a cable is also going to give up its connectivity. Okay. Let me know if there is an issue. Okay, so that was the story on microgrids. Then I think the other big application really is water pumping with solar, and everything agriculture, game, animal husbandry. You need water. You need water in different parts of your farm or your establishment, your camps, and solar PV is perfect for that because you have a bit of a reservoir. You pump water during the day nicely over the whole day. You don't actually just pump 2 hours of diesel at high power and you extract a lot of water. So it's better for the borehole. You know, for sunny countries, it's just ideal. It's great for, and I mean, there's so much application for that. You know, number one, drinking water, then animal husbandry, irrigation. So it's really a critical service, and that's actually quite close to my heart because I did my master's in solar water pumping in Namibia. So that was really quite something that I enjoyed, and it's not spoken of a lot because it's really a standalone application. It's just not a grid connected application, but it's definitely something that can change people's lives that have to carry water from the river. You know, you can have a water pump in the river, pump up to a reservoir. So a lot can be done with solar water pumps. Okay, I think that was it on the system constellation. Touch on one common misperception, which is the sentence of, you know, I'm going off the grid, or, you know, I want to go off the grid because I believe is the right thing to do. It makes me independent, etc., etc. And, you know, I think in general, it's not a great idea. You know, I think there might be financial realities at some point that develop in that regard, but kind of saying you're going off the grid and you're cutting your connection to your local authority, municipality, ESCOM, you suddenly are in a situation where you have to figure out how you're going to provide power to your own house 24/7. And we know that, for instance, if you live in Cape Town, you've got winter rains. It's sparse during winter. You might have days of inclement weather where you won't have enough solar. So what are you going to do? You know, if you cut off from the grid, then you have to run a diesel generator, you know, because a wind generator is not really an option, not for a residence, not even for a commercial site. You know, it's noisy, you know, you might not have enough of it at the same time. So one really has to think about whether that is, I think, in my view, the idea is really to have a grid across which you share power. Again, whole idea that as long as the grid is bidirectional and excess power is accepted by the grid, and we're moving to not a grid supplying everybody, but a grid interconnecting us all, like the internet. We can upload and download, and it goes both ways. Sure, the business models must work also for the utility operator, because they can't just provide a grid and we all use it for free. I get that, so it's just true, and there is no stopping that, so in my opinion, I would always try and stay connected to the grid. But I also believe that the realities in some countries are such that it might make sense to not use the grid at all, because it's become excessively expensive, And one such country is Namibia. Namibia has really high electricity prices, and excuse me, I believe that that they might have cost-reflective tariffs, but they are, I think, I recall that we built a roof on a shopping mall in Namibia. I think it was a 3 megawatt roof system, and it was paid off, simple payback in 2.5 years. And that just shows you, obviously, besides the higher resource, it just shows you how expensive the electricity there is and how it makes sense. Excuse me, how it makes sense to really, is it what I want to say? How financial sense, exactly, that's what I wanted to say. So in a country like that, where you might find that, sorry, just give me a second, I've really got something in my throat here, just a second. So that was the first trip up with the voice, huh? Yeah, so if you have a country with exceptionally high prices, you might consider it. And then you would have solar PV, battery storage, and a diesel generator. And you would be able to run that system off-grid. And if the provision of a grid connection costs you too much money per month, you'd have to pay a standby charge for it. Then you would say, okay, I'm cutting it because it's just too expensive and I'm going to operate in an off-grid manner permanently. But it is a commitment, and you are then responsible for your own electricity. Be financially worth it. Poor grid quality leading to ongoing power outages is another reason why you would do it. If the grid really just doesn't do much anymore, then you would at best use it as a source to your system, but you would not you would not sorry, I just got a bit distracted by the noise. Okay, I forgot my thought, but basically I'm saying, you would only use the grid to charge your batteries, for example, if it makes financial sense, or you take care of it yourself. These things really depend on the realities on the ground. So in terms of the summary of our configurations, I just want to highlight this, PV on-grid configuration, most commonly used worldwide. We see that being adopted more or less everywhere in the most basic forms. Sometimes we can export, sometimes we can't. So there are questions around this point here, really. And the main driver for this is that it leads to cost reductions. All right. Then the next one is the on-grid with storage. And I think that is already common for residences. It's developing for the CNI. It introduces battery storage, as you can see here, as another component to the system. And it is again, for cost savings in a more complex utility invoicing environment. Many things that can be addressed there. And then lastly, we've got the off-grid system, which has firstly the benefit to give access to electricity if there is none, and then secondly, this you see here that involves solar PV, which in most cases be cheaper than diesel generators, because diesel generators typically the fuel will be around $1 per liter. Sometimes it's $1.20. Other countries might have 70 cents because there's some level of cross-subsidization. I believe Angola is still sitting at 50 cents. Then it becomes more difficult to make this part competitive with the bottom. One actually has to see that. Yes, that concludes the system configurations at a very basic level. Perfect. Thank you. Any questions, Freddie? Or do you completely agree with our findings? Thank you.
Axel?
Yeah.
Yeah, in Europe it's now more than €2 per liter already for diesel.
More than €2?
Yeah, it's extremely expensive. It went up from 1.30 to almost more than €2 some places.
That is
horrible.
€2. That would be $2.20 at the current exchange. That's double the price than what you pay at the pump here. Is that across Europe or just Germany?
I don't know about the rest of Europe. Christine, do you know?
My word.
No, but so far it's Germany. Yeah.
Mm. That affects everything, Food and
that's a massive
else.
incentive. Are you all driving electric?
I am.
Vehicles?
I am.
No.
Christina, you got a moped.
Yeah, exactly. A small moped for the city. Exactly.
Okay.
In India, we have $1
that is something
and 20
else.
cents.
$1 and?
Yes. Around $1.20 for 1 liter.
I mean, that's also
where's that heat out?
Yeah, I just said that in India we have a price of diesel around $1.20.
Okay.
90
India.
INR, Indian rupees 90.
Yeah. Interesting is at the moment, but I know that East Africa or Kenya at least sits at $1.10. Tanzania sits at 80 cents. I think there is some cross-subsidization going on. Seychelles is at around $1, but taking the fuel obviously to the outer islands adds to it, and sometimes the landed cost then becomes $1.20, $1.30 US per liter, and that obviously all drives the feasibility of renewables. Anyway, the time is up for diesel. Well, I shouldn't be saying that, because we need diesel, and diesel plays a great role on these outer islands, where but all we need to do is minimize it. Instead of being 100% reliant on diesel, let's be 10% reliant on diesel, and we're doing a huge improvement for that site. Until such a time that we can actually on that side with even hydrogen generation. Okay, thank you very much. Then over to you, Johan.
Yep. Christina, are you having a break now, or are we continuing?
So on my side, we could continue, but let's ask Preggy. Preggy, do you need a 10 minutes break?
Yeah, can we get a 10-minute break? Yeah.
Yes, okay. Then let's have a 10 minutes break. We will be back at 12:32. I will write it in the chat.
Okay.
That would be German time, of course.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.